As Kristen said, I have a dual appointment between the Department of Theater, Teaching, and Arts and Cultural Management, and the other half of my job, well, it's a little more complex than that, but basically the other half is that I work as the Exhibitions Technology Specialist at the MSU Museum. And I just want to say that this picture that you see in the presentation is not really a true picture of the MSU Museum because it shows one building. In fact, while the administration, all of the exhibits team, the education team, the vertebrate collections, I think some of the other collections are up on the third floor as well, are there. All the cultural collections are, let's see here, take a look at the map. The museum is right about there. And then all the cultural collections are in this little building right next to the stadium right there in Central Services. And there's some of the cultural collections in the stadium. And then all of the anthropological collections and offices are over here in McDonald Hall. So we're a fragmented organization with a variety of digital engagement efforts all over the place that are not currently aligned. So that's a reason why I've been tasked by Laura Halou, who's the interim director of the museum, to facilitate building a digital strategy. And that would be one reason to do it. There are a bunch of other reasons to do it, including questions of access. So I'll get on that just a second here. Let's do that. So this quote here is from a presentation of somebody who presented about goals and needs for doing a digital strategy, implementing one at a museum at Museums of the Web in 2014. And it's a good quote to be sure. The one thing that I want to really focus on is that last line. Ultimately, a museum's goal with respect to technology is simple. The work that we do must be relevant to the public. And when we're talking about being relevant to the public, there are a number of ways that we're talking about that too. But one really important way that we're talking about it is, if you look at this infographic from this 2010 report, Demographic Transformation in the Future of Museums, by the American Alliance, well, not the American Alliance of Museums, at that time they were the American Association of Museums. They show the minority population from the 1900s to the 1970s being 10 to 13%, and then looking at increases in minority populations of 25 years before 2010, and then at 2010, 34%, and look 25 years ahead from 2010 to 2035, you're looking at 46% minority population. Core museum visitors today, 9% minority. So we're like back at the 1900s levels. This is a serious problem. This is a quote from Colleen Dillon Schneider, who works at she's the Chief Engagement Marketing Officer at Impacts Research and Development. That they do a lot of visitor studies and studies for arts and cultural organizations. They have the data to back this up. I can talk about that later, but it's just not enough time to get into that for this conversation. But she says, interestingly and unsurprisingly, technology accelerates acculturation. This means, of course, that utilizing digital platforms and cultivating real-time communications with emerging audiences is critical for organizations. Another reason to do a digital strategy, this is a little bit confusing just to look at this first, but this is from the New Media Consortium Horizon Report, Museum Edition 2015. But if you look up here at solvable challenges, developing digital strategies is identified as one of those for museums. What that basically means is, in order for us to be relevant to our audiences, we need to start building there so that we can get from the solvable challenges to the difficult challenges to what they say are the wicked challenges. And then here's a little list of issues that could be addressed through a digital strategy, and that is what makes this germane to our conversation here today. If you start from the top, we're talking about the MSU Museum website. If you guys have ever been to it, it's a disaster on toast. It's not navigable really well. It's not responsive. It's not current. It really doesn't showcase all the amazing things that happen in that organization, and it's pretty incredible what everybody does. The social media efforts are also fragmented. They're all over the place. They're not really aligned. That's something that could help in this. There are some of the collections that are digitized, but there's no comprehensive, scalable digital asset management system to be relevant to prospective audiences that want to actually see the collections in different ways. And then if we're doing any creative digital projects, we want to make sure that we're doing them with thoughtful planning and not just being reactive. It's a mode that a lot of museums suffer, is being just reactive to what's happening in the most recently, not planning and doing things in an aligned strategy for specific reasons. And then finally, and not insignificantly, accessibility. The museum has a number of accommodations for that are ADA compliant in the museum itself for physical disabilities, but there's really nothing for anybody with a cognitive disability or developmental disability or an emotional disability. There are ways that we can engage audiences that if 1 in 7 people in the United States have some form of disability, these are the visitors we're already getting. Why are we not being more relevant to them, who they are and what their needs are? So the way we're doing it is through this, the way we're building this strategy is through this framework called the Digital Engagement Framework that was developed by Jasper Visser and Jim Richardson. These individuals have worked with a lot of arts and cultural organizations, building these strategies with them. This is version 3 of their framework. They've gone through a couple of iterations of this thing. And basically what this, the great thing about doing using this framework is that, well, one, and a good reason to show it in the presentation to everybody here, is that this can be used in a variety of organizations, but also down to individuals, into single exhibitions, to festivals, whatever your needs are. If you want to engage in doing a digital strategy, this is a good way to do it. Another great feature of it that is particularly attractive to that organization for a few other reasons is that it really involves the voice of everybody in the museum. So just a real quick primer into what we're talking about when we say, okay, this is how we're developing this. The areas of the framework are situated like here, where you have objectives, co-created value, and trends, and they consider that the organizational basis of the whole plan. So the co-created value is when you consider the assets of the organization and the audiences that we're either reaching or not reaching, those that we want to engage further, and then talk about how they relate and what sort of surplus value comes out of that relationship as a future statement. Those are the future statements that lead the strategy. And then your objectives are the things that you establish to meet the co-created value. Your trends are what you consider when you're creating those statements. The assets and audiences build into that. And then the middle of the area is about how we're reaching the audiences, basically the first point of contact. What are the main sort of just media channels essentially that we're using, or what are our engagement avenues that we're using to just contact people initially. And then engage is how we move people along a continuum from just being reached to actually being activators for the organization, actually being real supporters of the organization, having an affinity toward the organization, to actually being spokespeople for the organization. How do you get somebody to that level? And then the middle area here is more where the rubber meets the road. What information do you need about the strategy, about the organization, about your visitors? What technologies are you going to specifically use, and what processes are you going to adhere to in your planning? So in order to get all this information, like I said, we're trying to get the voice of everybody in the organization. I'm fairly new to the organization. I started in August, so I don't know a lot about it. So I couldn't come in and say, oh, I'm going to build this whole strategy and do this thing for you guys, because I don't really know everything that goes on here. So we started off having some brainstorming sessions to discuss assets, audiences, and co-created value. That's happening right now. We're almost done with that. After that, and when I say we, I know that Kristen had alluded to an intern who's working with me on the project, Jordan Stokes, who is actually a savior to me on the project. I've been realizing I couldn't actually do this without her, which is awesome to have her around. After the brainstorming sessions, we're having two-hour meetings to come to consensus on trends in addition to assets, audiences, and co-created value, and then also have another meeting on reach, engagement, and objectives. After those meetings are done in late March is what we're looking at right now. We're still scheduling those. We're going to have a meeting with people who are frequently working on the front lines of digital engagement strategies to decide what we're going to be doing for information technology and processes. Then we'll be summarizing the outcome from the workshops. We'll draft the strategy. We'll elicit feedback from stakeholders around the organization, from around MSU who maybe don't work for the museum, but interface with the museum on a regular basis because there's a lot of people who do. And then we'll finalize and present the strategy at the first staff meeting in fall of 2016 and begin our plans. So one thing that I want to talk about is how is it that something like this is going to turn into like a successful way to engage your audiences, and what kinds of things is this actually going to elicit? One of my colleagues at the Royal Ontario Museum, Ryan Dodge, who is the digital engagement coordinator there, used the first version of the framework to developed it to align with their current strategy. The result of which was that they took 40 different disciplines that they were organized in the museum and made them into 8 centers of discovery, each having, and they each individually have their own Twitter handles. And that was never something stated in the strategy. They weren't going to say, oh, we're going to use Twitter to do this. The strategy said that they wanted to increase their conversations with their audience online. They use Twitter for each of these areas of discovery, and the impressions they're getting from the tweets and reach into the millions. But that's not, I mean, impressive as that is, it's not the real story that they're concerned with. The real story is how many conversations happen over that network, either replies, retweets, direct messages. It's getting up into the thousands. Their reach has been extending significantly, and I'm pretty sure their number of followers on their main Twitter site increased by 25,000 people, just from as a result of doing that. That's not to say that the MSU Museum is suddenly going to start going and using Twitter. It's not what something like this is going to actually say you're going to do. But there are, these efforts that we engage in for engaging audiences online or through digital mediums aren't just accidents, right? You don't get results like that just from, it's not because somebody is just young and ambitious. No, it's because of thoughtful planning. So I'm hopeful. The trick is to get make sure that the staff actually engages in using the strategy once it's completed. But I'm hopeful, since they all have a voice in it, that it's not something where I'm coming to them and saying, "This is mine." It's theirs. This is their strategy. This is what they wanted to do. I will have more data about that once we start to do our planning in the fall. Until then, I can be reached at my MSU address or at my Twitter handle, Candace Nyborg. So, thanks a lot.